The prairie wind howled across the Dakota Territory, sweeping snow in wild, blinding gusts. The sky had turned from a muted gray to a deep iron, signaling the arrival of a brutal blizzard. Alone in her remote cabin, Eliza Morgan, a 32-year-old widow, gathered the last of her chopped firewood before nightfall. Her breath fogged in the frigid air, and her fingers, though gloved, were already stinging with cold. She had lived on this patch of land for 3 years, learning the hard rhythms of frontier life after her husband died of pneumonia the second winter. Now every decision was about survival. As she pulled the sled full of wood toward the cabin, something in the corner of her eye caught her attention, a shape in the snow, unmoving. At first, she thought it was a dead animal or a log knocked over by wind, but curiosity tugged at her. Squinting through the snowfall, she dropped the sled and trudged toward it. What she found stopped her in her tracks. A man, half buried under a thin layer of snow. His dark hair was matted with ice, and he wore traditional Lakota garments, a deerskin tunic, fur-lined leggings, and moccasins now stiff with frost. A trickle of dried blood ran from a wound on his head, and one arm was twisted unnaturally. His face was gaunt, but even unconscious, it carried a fierce strength. Eliza's first instinct was fear. Her mind reeled. Was he part of a raiding party? Had he attacked settlers? What if his tribe came looking for him and saw her as an enemy? But the stronger voice within her, the one that remembered her husband gasping for breath while no help came, wouldn't let her walk away. She knelt beside him, checked for a pulse, and found it faint but steady. "God help me," she whispered, tugging off her scarf and wrapping it around his neck. Getting him back to the cabin was no small task. He was tall and heavy, his muscles rigid with cold. She dragged him by his shoulders, stopping often to catch her breath, her legs trembling. The wind was picking up, stinging her face with snow as sharp as sand. At last she reached the cabin, kicked open the door, and pulled him inside. Inside, the warmth of the fire barely touched the ice that had crept into his body. Eliza laid him on a bed of quilts near the hearth and set to work. She removed his soaked clothes, modestly but efficiently, and wrapped him in layers of wool and buffalo hide. She boiled water and steeped healing herbs, yarrow, willow bark, and echinacea, then dripped the tea slowly into his mouth. The night stretched long. The wind beat against the cabin like fists, but the warrior didn't stir. His breathing was shallow, his face flushed with fever. Eliza dabbed his forehead with snow, whispered prayers, and kept feeding the fire. More than once she considered what she might have brought upon herself. She didn't sleep. Toward dawn, he stirred. His eyes fluttered open for a moment, dark, fierce, and glassy with fever. He murmured something in Lakota, then fell back into unconsciousness. Eliza stared at him, her heart pounding. She had no idea who he was or what would happen next. All she knew was that a man was dying in the snow, and she couldn't let him die alone. Outside, the wind still howled. But inside that cabin, a fragile thread of life had been preserved. And neither she nor the stranger knew that the act of compassion would set in motion a chain of events that would change both of their lives forever. The morning after the storm was quieter, but the air was bitter cold. The blizzard had dumped over a foot of snow across the prairie, and Eliza Morgan's little homestead was nearly buried beneath drifts. The fire inside her cabin had burned low, and the warmth barely reached the corners of the single-room structure. But the Lakota warrior she had rescued still clung to life. Eliza sat near him, eyes heavy with exhaustion but mind too alert to sleep. She had spent the night tending to him, changing the poultices on his wounds, warming his limbs with heated cloths, and forcing spoonfuls of broth between his lips. He had drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling in Lakota, sometimes flinching as if in battle. Though his words were unfamiliar, The pain behind them was not out by midday. His fever had lessened slightly. When Eliza checked his forehead, it was no longer burning. He still hadn't spoken English, but his eyes were clearer now, and he watched her with guarded intensity. She offered him a tin cup of water. "Here," she said softly, holding it to his lips. He hesitated but drank, coughing after the first sip. His body was still weak, trembling with every breath. After a moment, he rasped a few broken words. "Where? You're safe," Eliza replied. "My cabin. You were in the snow. I brought you in." He looked around, trying to process what she said, then winced and grabbed at his side. She gently touched his shoulder, trying to reassure him. "You're hurt, but you'll heal. You need rest." He said nothing more, just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Later, as she gathered more wood from the lean-to, her mind ran wild. She had heard stories about Lakota warriors. Some painted them as noble, others as dangerous. She had never met one up close until now, but this man wasn't a story or a legend. He was human, wounded, cold, and alone. Still, the fear lingered. Who was he? Why was he out in the storm? Had he been part of a skirmish? Did his tribe think he'd been taken hostage? And more urgently, were they already looking for him? She kept the rifle loaded and nearby, not out of malice, but for protection. She didn't want to believe this man meant her harm, but she was a woman alone, and out here, help was days away. That night, as she ladled rabbit stew into a bowl and brought it to him, he surprised her. He looked at her directly and said, in heavily accented but clear English, "Tokala, my name." She blinked. "Tokala?" She repeated it slowly, testing the sound. "I'm Eliza." He gave a slight nod but said no more. The silence between them was thick, not unkind, but charged with unspoken thoughts. They were strangers, two people from different worlds brought together by snow and chance. As darkness fell, Eliza bolted the cabin door, placed extra wood by the hearth, and pulled a chair close to the fire. Tokala was sleeping again, his chest rising and falling slowly beneath the blankets. She studied him in the firelight, his high cheekbones, long lashes, and the strong lines of his face. Despite the fear, a quiet sense of duty settled in her chest. She had chosen to save him. She would see it through. But her instincts whispered caution. Something in the air outside felt watched. The wind carried unfamiliar sounds, crunches in the snow, the low howl of distant wolves. Or was it something else? That night, Eliza barely slept, her eyes flicking between Tokala and the frosted windows. She had done what any good soul might do, but kindness on the frontier often came at a cost, and she was beginning to wonder what price she might have to pay. By the third morning, the air was still. The storm had passed, but a heavy silence hung over Eliza's homestead, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Sunlight glinted off the snowbanks, making everything outside seem deceptively peaceful. Inside the cabin, however, the tension had begun to thicken like the frost on the windows. Tokala was awake, fully this time. His fever had broken during the night, and when Eliza brought him more broth, she found him sitting upright with effort, his back against the log wall, a blanket draped across his shoulders. His eyes followed her every move, no longer clouded by illness but filled with wary intelligence. "You are alone here?" he asked slowly. His voice was low and rough, but controlled. Eliza hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, just me." She didn't elaborate. Tokala took a long pause, then turned his gaze toward the frosted window. "You saved me," he said. "Why?" His question wasn't aggressive, more curious, even confused. Eliza set down the bowl and sat in the chair across from him. "I couldn't let you die in the snow," she said simply. "That's all." Tokala studied her in silence, then gave the smallest of nods. I remember the cold, then the dark, and then your fire." He pulled the blanket tighter around him. "I was hunting for roots and bark, medicine, for a child in my camp. She has coughing sickness too young to fight it." His voice cracked slightly. "Soldiers found me. I ran. They followed." Eliza's heart sank. She imagined him being pursued in the freezing wilderness, outnumbered, unarmed. "Were you shot?" she asked gently. Tokala shook his head. "No bullet. A rock. Fell when I ran. Hit my head." He closed his eyes briefly, and she saw the weight of his memory pass across his face like a shadow. "I meant no harm," he continued. "But they always think we do." Eliza's mouth went dry. She had heard about rising tension. Skirmishes between soldiers and native tribes were growing more frequent. The military was suspicious of any movement outside reservations. And now she had nursed a wounded warrior back to health, which, depending on who found out, could be seen as treason. She swallowed hard. "Do you think they're looking for you?" Tokala didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Not them." He looked out the window again, and this time his expression changed, sharpened with a kind of alertness she hadn't seen before. "My people," he said softly. "They will come." Eliza's breath caught. "Come? Here?" He nodded. "They will follow my trail. They will see your cabin. If they think you hurt me—" He trailed off suddenly, every creak in the logs, every groan of snow shifting on. The roof seemed louder. The woods surrounding her cabin, which had once given her a sense of solitude and safety, now felt like a wall closing in. She stood, walked to the door, and peered outside. Nothing but snow and trees. But she remembered what she felt the night before, that prickling sense that something was out there, watching. "I helped you," she said, more to herself than to him. Tokala nodded. "I know. I will tell them. But my people are proud, and they do not trust easily, especially not white settlers." Eliza turned back to him, her heart pounding. "What should I do?" He looked at her, his dark eyes calm but unflinching. "Hope they believe me." That night she barely closed her eyes. And just before dawn she heard the sound, a low rhythmic crunch of hooves on snow. Not one, many. She looked outside, and froze surrounding her cabin in complete silence were dozens of Lakota warriors, wrapped in furs, their faces painted with ash and war marks. They had come. And what they believed would decide everything. The dawn was cold and gray, casting a muted light over the snow-covered prairie. Eliza stood by the window of her cabin, her breath fogging the glass as she watched the figures emerging through the pea. White landscape. Dozens of Lakota warriors had silently surrounded her small home like a living ring of shadows against the snow. Her heart thundered. She felt both vulnerable and resolute. There was no running now, no hiding. Whatever came next would be decided within these walls. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped forward from the group, a Lakota elder named Red Elk, known among his people for wisdom and strength. His face was marked with age and tradition, deep wrinkles, a long gray braid, and stern eyes that studied Eliza carefully. In his hand he held a spear, but it was lowered in a gesture that spoke more of inquiry than of aggression. Eliza stepped outside, her hands raised slightly to show she meant no harm. The biting cold bit into her skin, but she stood firm. Red Elk's voice was deep and commanding. "You have Tokala, a warrior. Why do you hold him?" Eliza's throat tightened. "He was dying in the snow. I found him and brought him inside. I didn't hold him captive. I saved his life." A murmur rippled through the warriors. Some shifted their stance, fingers brushing the weapons at their sides. Others watched silently, their eyes sharp as hawks. Red Elk's gaze remained steady. "Our people searched for Tokala. We feared he was lost." Now we find him with a white woman. Is he well, or is he a prisoner?" Tokala, who had been resting inside the cabin, stepped forward. His body was still weak, but his eyes burned with quiet. "Strength?" He raised his hand in a peaceful gesture and spoke in Lakota to the crowd. His voice was hoarse but clear. "He is not a prisoner," Tokala said. "She saved me. I am healed because of her." The warriors listened closely as Tokala continued, translating to Red Elk as best as he could, sharing what had happened in the blizzard and his escape from soldiers. Red Elk turned to Eliza, his eyes searching hers. "Why should we trust your words? The history between our peoples is bloodied and broken. How do we know you did not harm him?" Eliza's heart pounded, but she kept her voice calm. "Because if I wanted to hurt him, I wouldn't have given him water, warmth, or medicine. I am alone here. It was only mercy that moved me." The elder was silent for a long moment, considering. Around them, the warriors exchanged glances, some still wary, others curious. Then Red Elk spoke again. "Tokala speaks for you, but trust is not given lightly. We will not take him by force, not while he stands and speaks for you. But you must prove your heart." Eliza nodded. "What must I do?" Red Elk lowered his spear. "For now, you will remain here. We will camp nearby. No harm will come to you or Tokala. But know this, if you betray us, if you deceive, there will be consequences." The warriors began to settle down in the snow just beyond the tree line, their campfires small beacons in the frozen landscape. Eliza closed the cabin door behind her and locked it, leaning against the wood to steady her breath. Tokala came beside her, still pale but steady. "This is only the beginning," he said quietly. "They test you." She looked at him, determination rising through the fear. "I don't want to be their enemy. I want to earn their trust." Tokala nodded. "Then you must show them who you are." The standoff was tense but peaceful, a fragile truce hanging between two worlds. Eliza's lone cabin, once a symbol of isolation, had become the center of an uneasy meeting where past wounds, cultural divides, and raw survival instincts clashed. In the coming days, she would have to navigate this delicate balance between respect and suspicion, between the fears of the past and the hope for understanding. The warriors might be fierce, but they were not unreasonable. And Tokala, recovering, was her guide into a world she had only glimpsed before. This moment marked the turning point. The future would be shaped by every choice Eliza made and by whether her actions spoke louder than the history between their peoples. The days that followed the standoff were filled with a fragile tension. As Eliza found herself caught between two worlds, her own life on the frontier and the close-knit Lakota tribe now camped just beyond her cabin's clearing. The warriors had not left. Instead, they watched her with guarded eyes, as if measuring every move she made. It was clear that while they did not intend harm, trust had yet to be earned. Eliza understood the stakes. To these proud people, a white woman harboring their wounded warrior was a mystery and perhaps a threat. But she was determined to prove her good intentions. Tokala, now stronger, had been her voice before, but she knew she must take a more active role if she wanted peace. One morning, the tribe's medicine woman, Viaka, approached Eliza's cabin. Draped in soft buckskin and adorned with beads and feathers, Viaka's calm eyes held centuries of wisdom. She spoke little English, but her gestures were gentle, inviting. Eliza stepped outside and met Viaka halfway. The two women exchanged quiet greetings, both aware that this encounter was a significant test. Viaka led Eliza toward the camp, where she was introduced to the child Tokala had spoken of, the little girl with a persistent cough and fever that had worried the tribe. The child lay on a woven blanket near the fire, pale but alert. Her mother sat nearby, watching Eliza with a mixture of suspicion and hope. Eliza felt the weight of their eyes on her as she knelt beside the child. She examined her carefully, recalling the herbal remedies her own grandmother had taught her. Back East ingredients that might soothe coughs and bring fever down. She spoke softly to the child, her hands steady as she prepared a poultice of willow bark and wild sage. The tribe's medicine woman observed closely, occasionally nodding or pointing to herbs Eliza didn't recognize. Though their languages were different, their shared knowledge of healing bridged the gap. Word spread quickly through the camp about the white woman's healing hands. Some warriors softened their expressions when they saw the child improve. Others remained cautious but respectful. Over the next days, Eliza returned to the camp each morning to tend to the girl, gathering herbs from the snowy forest with the help of Viaka and other women. She learned their names, their customs, and even began to understand the rhythm of their Lakota songs and prayers. Tokala stayed close by her side, walking alongside as translator and protector. Together, they bridged the cultural divide, a partnership born of necessity and growing respect. Though the tribe's warriors still kept their distance, their wary gazes began to shift into ones tinged with curiosity. Eliza noticed subtle gestures of acceptance. A warrior sharing a piece of dried meat, a nod of acknowledgement when their eyes met, a child shyly approaching to watch her work. But trust was not given freely. Eliza knew that one misstep could unravel everything. She moved carefully, honoring the customs she observed and never overstepping boundaries. One evening, as the sky blushed pink with sunset, Red Elk called Eliza to his tent. He spoke quietly, but firmly, praising her for her courage and the kindness she had shown to the tribe and especially to Tokala. "You have honored us with your actions," Red Elk said. "This child's life is proof. Our people see your heart." Eliza felt a swell of relief but also understood that their acceptance was not complete. It was a beginning, not an end. The warriors began to pack up their camp soon after. The child's recovery was steady, and Tokala's strength returned day by day. Red Elk approached Eliza at her cabin door, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "We will leave soon," he said. "But know this, you are welcome among us." As the Lakota warriors mounted their horses and melted back into the vast winter landscape, Eliza felt a mixture of sadness and hope. In those few days, a bridge had been built between two very different worlds, a fragile bond forged through compassion, respect, and shared humanity. For Eliza, the lesson was clear. Trust could be earned even in the harshest conditions if one had the courage to try. And for Tokala, the healing was not just of body, but of spirit, bridged by the unlikely alliance with the woman who found him in the Faune. But of spirit, bridged by the unlikely alliance with the woman who found him in the body. Snow. The morning after the Lakota camp had broken, a quiet stillness settled over Eliza's homestead. The sharp scent of pine and smoke lingered faintly in the crisp air, and the fresh snow sparkled under the pale sunlight. The warriors had ridden away, their horses' tracks the only evidence of their presence. For Eliza, the events of the past days felt almost dreamlike, an extraordinary chapter in her life she could hardly have imagined. Yet the story was not quite over. Tokala, now stronger and more steady on his feet, chose to remain a while longer. His wounds had healed, but the bond between him and Eliza had grown beyond necessity. It was now something deeper, forged in hardship, kindness, and mutual respect. That morning, Tokala helped Eliza repair the cabin's roof, patching holes where the storm had leaked and reinforcing the walls against the relentless cold. As they worked side by side, their conversations grew more natural. Eliza learned about Lakota traditions, their connection to the land, and the meaning behind Tokala's name, the cunning and swift fox, revered for its wisdom. Kala, in turn, was curious about Eliza's world, the hardships of homestead life, the loneliness of widowhood, and her hopes for the future. They shared stories by the fire at night, the glow of embers illuminating their faces as the cold crept in around the edges of the cabin. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, Tokala handed Eliza a small carved figurine, a fox made from soft wood, smooth and worn by hands long gone. It was a token of friendship and gratitude, a symbol of the new bond between them. Eliza accepted it with reverence, feeling the weight of its significance. It was more than a gift, it was a promise of connection across cultures, a bridge between two souls who had met in the most unlikely of circumstances. But even as they forged this friendship, Eliza was aware of the wider world waiting beyond. The snowy woods, the tension between settlers and native tribes, the government's harsh policies, and the precarious peace that hung by a thread. Tokala spoke quietly one evening about his people's struggles, their fight to preserve their land, their culture, and their dignity in a world that sought to erase them. Eliza listened, humbled and heartbroken by the truths he shared. Despite these challenges, their time together offered hope, a glimpse that understanding and compassion could transcend history's wounds. When the day came for Tokala to leave, Eliza felt a pang of sadness but also a fierce gratitude. She watched him mount his horse, strong and dignified, as he turned to nod one last time before disappearing into the forest. Her cabin, once a symbol of solitude and survival, now held the echoes of a friendship born in snow and hardship. Testament to the power of kindness in the face of fear. As spring's first buds began to break through the thawing earth, Eliza kept the carved fox on her mantle, a reminder that even in the coldest winters, warmth could be found in unexpected places. And though their paths had diverged, the bond between Eliza and Tokala would endure, a silent promise whispered between the snowflakes and the wind, waiting for the day it might be renewed.